Hey there, FlossTube, it's Cathy, the hands-on designer, and welcome to the Beach Please Shadowbox finishing tutorial. Woo, that's a mouthful. So I want to show you, this is the original Beach Please design. This came out earlier this summer, and I designed 15 of these little seaside snippets, or snippets of the sea. Had a lot of fun with the alliterations on this one. Stitched those, they're DMC on a 32 count, I think it's platinum Cashel, or excuse me, platinum Belfast, and with the Beach Please below it. And so I just love the way this pillow turned out. Just fun, fun motifs, nice clean lines. And this is probably going to sit, well, I'd like to say it was going to sit in a bedroom at my beachside house, but yeah, that's not going to happen. So I actually, one of the rooms in my house kind of has some beachy themes. So that's where this is going to go. But what the tutorial is about today is actually the shadow box finish. And when I was designing the original piece, sometimes I know I've often said sometimes I have the finish in mind before I actually have the design in mind. And this was kind of a happy medium. They both finishes were kind of neck and neck as far as how I wanted to do this. But I really knew that I wanted to jump from a softer finish like this to a harder hardscape finish like this. This kind of a layout harkens me back to a class project that I did in college that I just always liked. In fact, I think I still have the art project somewhere. It's probably buried. I don't know. But it really kind of, even Bill looked at it and he goes, hey, that reminds me of that project that you did. It's nice when things work out like that. But anyway, so I picked 9 of the little motifs and I stitched them on 14 count craft brown perforated paper. And then I figured out how big I wanted my frame to be. And this is, it's a deeper frame. It's actually about 1 1/8 inches deep. Okay. And I did purchase this. It was custom framed. So I did purchase the frame, and then they knew I wanted a shadow box. So they built the insides with I picked the mat board for the back, and then the side is the matching mat board. So I did pay to have the frame and then the shadow box set up. And then I also did use the museum glass because basically I didn't want the glare. I mean, look, I've got all kinds of sunshine coming in there and you're not really seeing a glare there. Okay, you were a little over here, but that's right in the sun. But basically, if I wanted to take a picture or something like that, I wouldn't want the glare. So this was not, I really like to do a lot of economical finishes. I can't say this is one of my more economical finishes. The frame and everything was probably right around $100. And I will say most of that was because of the glass that I chose, because it was the museum glass, just because I didn't want the glare. But since I was able to finish a lot of it myself, then I did save a little bit of money there. And sometimes I figure I can splurge a little bit just because I do so many of my other finishes myself, so that, sometimes when I want something for myself, I wanted an art piece for my home, because this one probably won't travel on trunk shows just because of the glass. So I definitely didn't mind just investing a little bit more in the finish. But anyway, so in the video, it's going to be, as I was doing this, I had a lot of people say, well, how did you finish it? How did you do that? How did you get them all in there? So I did take pictures as I finished, and just like the triple play pillows, I did kind of a voiceover, talk you through the steps, kind of thing. So I didn't actually talk about how the sides of the shadow box were built up, but I do show you that in some of the pictures. But more, I wanted to talk to you about how I got the little pieces of perforated paper mounted in there. So it's a kind of a fun process. It was something actually I was kind of figuring out on the fly, and I was just so tickled when it worked out. So that's why I was glad I took pictures and I can kind of share my information in there. As always, I always ask, if you have a way that you're like, oh no, I like my way better, well then by all means do that way. I never say that mine is the only way to do something. If you're a shop and you're going to do this as a class project in your shop and you want to show my video, absolutely do share the video. just make sure you give hands-on a shout out. And also, or if you're going to shoot your own video, again, also if it's based on this concept, please give a shout out there too. So I appreciate that very much. Plus, I like to go and check it out and give you, add a girl and golf clap or add a boy or add a stitcher and just kind of see it all come together. So I will say, I did choose obviously like a white background in this grayish frame because this is what goes in my home. Crafty U in Ohio has had a class already because they have a great framer there. And it was so fun to watch everybody in their class as they finished it. So the finisher kind of figured out a way to how their framer figured out how she would do this. So like I said, it's awesome. There's many different ways to accomplish the same thing. But what was really cool is that some of the gals and guys that were in the class chose a different background color, not white like I did. So Crafty U, she's in Ohio. Go check out like her Instagram pages and her Facebook pages because she did post some pictures from it. So if you're like, oh, I like that, but I might not want to do white, go check out the pictures because then it's nice to be able to see those kinds of finishes in different colors and whatnot. So let's see. So the frame was 8 1/4 inches what I bought. So I ended up with like a 7 3/4 inch opening. So because you lose a quarter inch on either side because of the rabbit in the frame. And I came to that measurement because I knew each square on the 14 count perforated paper was going to be about just a little over 1 1/4 inch. So I took 1 1/4 times 3, and then I wanted everything to be 1/2 inch apart. So then 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch, doing math. And then I knew I wanted a kind of a proportional amount showing around the outside edge, which is right at about 1.5 inches. And then of course a 1/4 inch more because you lose some of that. So that's how I came up with my overall size. Now, a lot of places do sell like shadow box frames. They're already shadow boxes, so you don't have to get the custom frame. But you can certainly use that and do the same thing. Or if you have a frame in your stash, you're like, that might just be deep enough to create a shadow box. Lots of fun. Use it, and you don't have to do just 9. You could do all 15, or you could make them go this way, you can make them go that way, or you could do lots of things. That's what I love about this project. It's very customizable. Anyway, so I think I've said all that I can say for the moment. So let's get going with the tutorial. Thanks. Welcome to the Beach Please Shadow Box tutorial. You'll want to gather all of your finishing supplies. You'll need different scissors, some for paper, maybe an X-Acto knife, ruler, a padded work surface like like a mat for your quilting, that type of thing. Also maybe your double-sided acid-free tape. And then this might be something that you don't have in your arsenal, this art tape. You can see where I purchased it. I like to use this a lot of times in my projects just because it can help hold things down, but it doesn't have as much or as high an adhesive as, say, like the double-sided acid-free tape. And this is 1/2 inch wide, and I definitely suggest getting 1/2 inch wide. You'll see why later in the project. And it's just kind of sometimes just a nice handy thing to have on hand. It doesn't have, you'll see it says will not damage surfaces and leaves no tacky residue. So it definitely holds things in place, but it doesn't mar the paper or the mat board. So it's just kind of a nice little tool to have every once in a while. All right. First step is going to be once you have chosen which of the 9 motifs that you want to stitch on the 14 count craft brown perforated paper, you'll want to trim those down to the little squares. In this case, I just trimmed 1 block beyond where the stitched image is. And you want to make sure that all of them are the same size. This really shouldn't be a problem because the designs are all the same size. But do double check as you trim everything just to make sure that they're all the same size, because that'll be important as you get going with the shadow box. All right, and then what I did is I'm going to start cutting pieces of foam core. This is just a regular thickness of foam core. It's about, about an 1/8 inch. It's actually a little over 1/8 inch, kind of between an 1/8 and a quarter. It's just the general type that you buy at like most of your craft stores. Nothing specific or custom about it. And what I did is I measured my perforated paper squares, and they'll be a little bit over 1 1/4 inches. And I would like the foam core to cover most of the back of the perforated paper square. And so once I get the size that I want, I'll then of course cut 9 of them to make sure I have one for each of my perforated paper squares. Now, I did experiment in the beginning with just having smaller squares because the trick is I don't want to see the white beyond the edge of the stitching, but I want it to cover at least all the areas where there are holes in your perforated paper. Some of the designs are fuller coverage than others, and I just didn't want to see like space in there. It just kind of drew the eye where you didn't want it to go. And so I just wanted to make sure that they all had kind of a full coverage underneath. All right, so you can see here what I did is I was measuring the foam core. As you can kind of see sort of with the measurements on the mat board there, the perforated paper is 1 1/4, a little over 1 1/4 actually. So I first started by cutting my foam core pieces 1 1/4, and then I played with them to make sure that I was getting a good fit. So here's once I've cut a piece of foam core and I'm placing it onto the back side of a stitched square, and you can see kind of the edges of the perforated paper showing all around. Almost looks like a little postage stamp or something like that. And again, I like having full coverage back there. It gives a good support back there. Plus, then the eye doesn't get drawn to like air showing between maybe areas that are non-stitched versus areas that are stitched. It just gave it a nice uniform look. And I know it's a little difficult to see given the shadow over top of the stitched piece, but you can definitely kind of see where you don't see it beyond the edges of the stitched piece, and you can see a little bit of the white kind of shining from below the perforated paper through the open holes. And once you have cut all 9 pieces and you've got them all to the size that you need, you'll want to grab some of your double-sided acid-free tape. And you can purchase this. It's called stitchery tape. You can purchase this from your local or online shop. I do sometimes carry it here on my website, handsondesign.biz. I like the wider 1.5 inch wide rolls because then you can kind of cut it to the various sizes that you need. In this case, I mean, obviously it's not a perfect square, but it's square-ish. And I'm going to put that on each of the 9 pieces of foam core. And there you can see I've put a piece and did pretty good coverage. I don't want to be too skimpy here, although I don't think you need much more than this. This is the only adhesive that will be holding the foam core onto the back of your stitching. And then here you can see there's another shot of the adhesive on the back of each of the pieces of foam core. And you can see I've got my my X-Acto knife there kind of ready. And sometimes if you're having trouble peeling the paper back off of the double-sided acid-free tape, you can just use the tip of the X-Acto blade to lift up a corner of the tape and then use your fingernails, of course, then to peel the rest of it. And that helps make it a little bit easier if you're having a hard time with that. Right here you can see I'm pulling off the paper back of the double-sided tape, and I'm getting ready to put it on the back of the wrong side of the stitched perforated paper. All right, and I just plopped it right on the back. Made sure it was nice and centered, just so that, again, as I mentioned in the previous steps, you can't see the foam core peeking beyond the edge of the perforated paper. Now, I'm going to suggest peeling, even though I've got the paper on all 9 of the pieces of foam core, just peel one at a time, because I would hate for it to become just a double-sided mess until you get everything nice and attached to the back of your stitching. Just a little hint and word to the wise. Okay, so so this is actually the front of the stitching. Yes, I know I have a square kind of hiding the stitch design, but you can see on the edges that that's what it's going to look like on the front after I've attached the piece of foam core to the back. And you see it basically gives me full coverage on the back, and it's exactly how I want it to look. So when I ordered my frame from the craft store, they also included, they did build in the sides of the shadow box, and I'll show you a picture of that later. But they did also give me a piece of matching mat board for the back, and this is what I'm going to be mounting all the little seaside squares onto. So I want to find the center, and this is probably the easiest way I could come up with to find the center. And let me talk about this method a moment. I knew what I wanted this to look like. I'll be honest, when I first started doing this, I wasn't exactly sure how to get them all centered, square, and even. And so I kind of thought through the process, and really I was just, I don't want to say I was making it up as I went along, but in a way I was, because I knew what I wanted it to do. And I knew I had the tools to get the look that I wanted. And I found that this really worked, and it was pretty easy to do. So I found the very center. We're going to start with the center motif and build out from there. So I found the center of that piece of mat board that the framing company cut for me for the very back of my shadow box. All right, this is what you'll see when you're looking at it. When I was holding it up, this is the back. This is the mat board that shows. And you can see I'm taking a pencil. I'm laying my two rulers diagonally across each other. And I know the one in the top right corner, it's not exactly on the corner. Okay, this was for photo purposes, and it's hard to do all this and take a photo at the same time. But I made sure I found my center by laying the rulers diagonally, and found my center, and I made a little mark with my pencil. And it's hard to see, but in the very center, I lightly marked my center point with a pencil. And now you'll notice that I actually have now placed tape on the corners, and this is that artist tape that I placed in the corners to hold my mat board down so it didn't shift and move around. Probably I would suggest doing this when you go to find your center. I actually probably should have done that when I did, because things were moving, and then I thought, I probably should tape it down. So that's what I did, and this definitely makes it easy in these next steps to go ahead and keep that mat board in place. And as I mentioned, that's why I like this art tape, because later I'll pull that off and it doesn't peel the mat board or anything like that, so you don't run any risk there. I did kind of I made sure it was stuck pretty well, but I also didn't really tamp it down a whole lot. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to move. Now, before I taped it, you'll notice if you look at the grid lines on my mat that I did make sure that my mat board was right along, was very square on the mat, because I'm going to use these measurements as I go along. This all has to work together to get me nice and centered and nice and square. So if you look along, especially on the left-hand side, you'll see I'm following that straight line of the 10-inch line. And that's helpful. All right. Not necessarily centered or following the line on the top and the bottom. We'll actually use a ruler here in the next steps for that. But definitely make sure that your mat board is squared onto the cutting mat on the bottom. All right, so I'm going to take my ruler in this step, and I know it's kind of hard to see in the very middle, but if you see my dot underneath my yellow ruler, it's kind of, it's right in the middle of the mat board. So if you look close enough, you can see my center point there. What I'm going to do is I am going to be taping off segments that will end up being 1 1/4 inch big, because that's how big my stitched pieces are. So what I did is I laid my ruler. I'm going to mark some tape lines. So what I want to do is I took the 1 1/4, that's the size opening that I'm trying to kind of lay out. And I took that in half, which happens to be 5/8 of an inch. So if you'll see on the 5/8 inch mark, I laid that up against the center point. So if you kind of see that 1.5 inch that's up in that 1.5 marker on the ruler, that's, you know, sort of in the middle of the piece, but look up a few hash marks to the 5/8 inch mark, you'll see my dot there in the center. And then if you look over to the edge on the left and the right hand side, you'll see my ruler is nice and square on my mat. So I'm using all these measurements to kind of make sure I've got everything nice and square. All right. And then you can kind of see where I now laid a piece of that artist tape right on the edge of the ruler. I didn't shift the ruler. I made sure it was stuck in place. You could probably even tape that down if you wanted to. And I laid a piece of artist tape right along the very edge. So now this is marking the top line of where my center stitch piece, my stitch square, will go. So then what I did is I know that I want a 1 1/4 inch opening. So I scooted my ruler up to the 1 1/4 inch mark and lined that up with the bottom edge of that piece of tape that I put in place. Really, the most important measurement that you have to make is really that first tape piece for getting the placement, because everything from here on out, we're going to use the pieces of tape that we've already put in place as guides to make sure that we've got all the correct measurements. So as you notice, then I put a piece of tape along the bottom edge of the ruler. Then I turned everything. So I turned the entire mat that I was working on and turned it 45 degrees. And then I'm going to work the top and the bottom. I'm going to repeat what I did 2 steps ago. I'm going to find my 5/8 inch line on my ruler, and I'm going to line that up on top of that center mark. And I'm going to make sure my ruler's nice and lined up on the outer edges. We're basically doing the same thing that we did 2 steps ago. And I put my piece of tape down, and then now I'm measuring my 1 1/4 inch mark from the bottom edge of the tape, and I'm going to put my second piece of tape in. So that's what I end up with. Now I have marked my center square. All right, so now you can clearly see where my center mark was. Yeah, I know I have 2 marks. I ended up using the darker of the 2 marks. And there is a little bit of fudge factor here. The biggest thing really is that we want to get it as centered as possible and everything as square as possible. And you can see how I've measured above my center mark, the 5/8 inch, and then I put my piece of tape down. And then I used my ruler to measure 1 1/4 down from the bottom side of the tape. And that's how I placed the second piece of tape. And then I just turned the direction and placed those final 2 pieces. So now I have my center line, my center square marked. That's where the center, in this case, I did the pelican there. My center stitchy seaside motif will go there. And now I'm going to build more tape layers to create the squares, all 9 of the squares. But now this gets a little bit easier because I get to use the tape that I've already put in place as a guide. And here's just another look. Pardon the long hair stuck in my tape. I was too nervous at this point to pull tape up to try and get hair out, that I just went with it because I knew we'd be taking that off later. So again, this just gives you another view of what we're looking at. There's my center dot, and I've just measured 5/8 inch out with the ruler and a nice square edge and laid that tape. And then measured 1 1/4 inch from the bottom of the tape to lay the second piece of tape in, and then repeated that I did the horizontal first, and then I did the vertical second. So again, now we're going to use these tape lines and make sure, obviously, you want to lay the tape nice and straight, and you're going in with the ruler, so everything should be in good shape. And now we're going to use these tape lines to measure for the next tape lines, because we need to create 9 openings in all. All right, so I fast forwarded a little bit here, and you can see what I've now done. I've laid the ruler over top of the edge of the tape and measured 1 1/4 inch away on all 4 sides, and I laid the rest of my artist tape down, and I now have 9 squares that are the size of my stitched pieces, and they're all a 1/2 inch apart. So this helps me get them nice and even and get them in rows and looking nice and nice and even in the final piece. So now what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to put more of that now we're doing the double-sided tape, and I put that, a nice size piece on the back of each of the pieces of foam core. And again, while I'm not covering it completely, I am getting a good coverage because, again, as I said, on the piece where you placed it onto the stitch piece, that's the only way we're adhering the foam core to the stitching. Now this is the only way we're adhering the foam core to the mat board. So you got a good, nice, pretty good coverage with that double-sided tape. All right, I started in the center. I just felt like that was a good place to start. So I peeled back my double-sided tape. And because I've got this, because really the foam core ended up being closer to the 1 1/4 actually than the perforated paper. Perforated paper was actually a little bit larger, just a hair larger. No pun intended. But it fit ever so nicely down. It almost kind of just nestled into between the taped edges. And that was definitely what helped me get everything to be nice and lined up. And then I just thought I would just start building from there. I put the next one and I really was very methodical how I did this. I did not try and do this in a hurry. I really wanted everything to be nice and lined up. That was my goal for this project, because when you're looking at it, anytime, like if something would be twisted or not quite lined up, your eye is going to be drawn to that. And I really wanted just a nice, overall, everything was just lined up and looked good. And there I was. Then I went up to the top corner and I just kept filling in each of the little openings with the peeling the double-sided tape off the back of the foam core, and then just nestling it into the open spots on the mat board. And let me tell you, with each one I did, I got more and more comfortable with the process. And there you go. We've got all 9 in place now. And I really like the way they look. They're all nice and even. And so now the next thing we need to do is we need to work on removing a lot of that tape. So I removed the outer edges first because I knew the inner tape might be a little tricky, just because it would catch I didn't want it to catch the perforated paper. And since the perforated paper was a little bit larger than the 1 1/4, I knew it might be just a little bit harder to get the tape out of the middle. I'd have to finagle a little bit more. So I thought, I'm not going to get my feet wet. I'm going to do the outer ones. Plus, since those were the last one done, they were laying on top of all the other pieces. So it was just easier to get the work from the outside in. And you can kind of see I'm pulling back on it, and I'm pulling it away from the edge of the perforated paper squares, just so it wouldn't catch on those squares. Now, when I go to do the inner pieces, you have to be kind of careful, because I will say it did catch a little bit on the perforated paper. So I just kind of like finagled it a little bit, moved it this way, moved it that way. You can see I am holding on to some of the tiles with the tips of my fingers, made sure my hands were nice and clean, but it just kind of kept them into place. They did wiggle a little bit, but I am happy to say they didn't wiggle out of place. So just be kind of careful as you do that. Just take your time. Now I put this picture in, even though it looks like I'm doing the same thing. I wanted to show you, if you look carefully at the tape, right where I'm pulling like on it, it looks like it kind of some of it ripped. Well, it did, because some of it was actually stuck under the pieces of perforated paper. That's okay, because I'm going to show you in the next couple slides how to get those out. But just it's almost, I likened, if you've ever peeled wallpaper, it was a little celebration when you could get a large piece of the tape off on the inner squares or in the inner lengths. So, but it'll be okay. So here you can kind of see I did end up pulling one of the inner strips, and then it left a little bit behind. So I gently, carefully used my X-Acto blade in there to kind of lift it up, and I was able to peel off more that way. I was just very careful to not poke into the mat at all. I didn't want to make any marks that were going to show. And for those, there were a few troublesome spots. You can kind of see I even kept a pair of tweezers on hand, and it easily pulled up. I just kept this photo because as I kept pulling off little bits of the tape, I was making a pile, and it just kind of cracked me up, and I just thought this was kind of funny. So you can see my tweezers, and you can see my X-Acto, and just, I don't know why my projects always tend to generate garbage. So, but it's okay if you can't get that tape off in, one fell swoop. All right, so this is now I'm ready to get framing. So when I purchased the frame made into a shadow box from my framer, you can kind of see how they built up the inside. They've got it lined with foam core and then lined with matte because matte board, and that matte board matches the matte board that I've just been putting all the 9 squares on. And so then that foam core width will just give it something to settle on when I'm ready to frame it. So I just wanted to show you what the inside of my frame looked like. So if you did have a frame that had nice depth to it, that's sort of how you would build up the inside. And the glass is already in place. So I made sure that I got rid of any little frifts before I was ready to seal her up, and also made sure the glass was nice and clean. And there you can see I got everything nice and cleaned, and I quickly put the mat board with the tiles on it in place so I wouldn't get any extra hairs or frifts or dust or whatever in there. Now this is really, to me, if you don't have one of these, the dual point driver, this is very essential if you're going to do any kind of framing. We had these at the shop, and you'll see actually the gals that I ordered the frame from put their own little point drivers in, and as I was opening them up, they actually came out. So I had to put in fresh point drivers, and it's like it's kind of like a cross between like a nail gun and a staple gun. This one I did get years ago at Hobby Lobby, and I want to say back then it was probably right around $65. Back when they still had coupons, so of course I was able to use that. But if you do any type of framing, it's definitely well worth the investment rather than having to use a screwdriver and push those glazing points in. This is really nice to have. And again, that's called a point driver. And that's what my piece looks like when I have closed it up on the back. And so then the front. And I loved the look of it. I just felt like it created a very elegant piece, a statement piece, an art piece for my home. And it's an art piece that I made. And I really liked the way it looked. So from the side angle, yes, you can see the foam core pieces. But when it's hanging on a wall and you're looking straight on, you won't see those foam core pieces. So, and again, that's why I wanted them to all be uniform in size, so that if you would see them, your eye isn't drawn to any misshapes or sizing differences, that type of thing. It just looks all kind of just nice and uniform. And there you go. Another angle shot where you can kind of see my corners of my foam core underneath each of the stitch pieces, and just kind of the way I'm tickled with the way this came out, because this was exactly what my vision was to be for this. So Beach Please, either a pillow or a fun little shadow box. And again, experiment with color. You don't have to do the white background. That's just the aesthetic that I was going for. So you can do all kinds of things. Now, if you did, say, do a different color for the matting in the background, and you don't want the white to show because your eye would get potentially kind of drawn to that, maybe think about getting a marker or something and actually, kind of marking on the side, magic marker, and marking on the side of the foam core, maybe in a color that would match or be similar to the mat board that you chose in the background. So, or just leave it white. That would be another look for it. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and enjoy the stitch. Till next time.